Hey there, welcome to Postscript. And we are just starting a brand new series called How We Roll, and we're jumping into our church DNA, but also more than just, as Jeff said, more than just kind of our church DNA, but as a community, it's just kind of a reminder of why we do what we do as a community. And this last week, it was of the very first, the first one, and we jumped into kind of a new, at least not necessarily like new in concept, but new wording for us. Jesus sets our tone. And it is interesting that we kind of moved, and you talked about in your message how we kind of moved away from we boycotts, if that language isn't so, but that statement was also pretty directed to like what we do and don't do. And Jesus sets our tone is much more just about our tone, Talk a little bit about why that shift is important right now, sort of for us as a church, within our culture, that kind of stuff, to really kind of key in on why we need to get the tone right.
Yeah, well, one of the things I like about the new wording is it is positive. It's about what we're for, that Jesus sets our tone and all that. But, we talked about it in the message, but the tone is so sour in our culture.
Right.
And it's so counterproductive to anything positive happening. And, we live in a pluralistic culture, and Christians should be the best pluralists and should be the most gracious, the most, and that's attractive. And I think now more than ever, if we can just get the Jesus tone, if we can get the right tone, I mean, Bible says don't be among those outside the faith, don't be quarrelsome, don't be argumentative, be gracious, be kind, be humble. Be quick to listen, but slow to speak, slow to get angry. If we could just do that, I think it shows the difference of Jesus in a way that will be really attractive, and also really helpful in culture as well. And we've got a lot to learn with, too. It's not just we've got it all figured out, and these people who disagree with us don't have anything to say. What you find is when you do what the Bible says and you actually begin to listen to people, then you, with humility, you realize, well, yeah, we do have something to say that's really important, but they actually have something to say too. And we can find common ground. We can enrich our own understanding of our faith and what we believe.
We all have blind spots.
So that's one of the gifts of teachability and humility. We're always our best. I mean, the Proverbs talk so much about teachability and how we're our own best friend when we choose to be teachable and when we choose to listen, and how we're our worst enemy when we think we've got it all figured out and we don't. Right. It's just delusional. And so I think if we could model this right now, it'd be so refreshing for people.
Well, in this series, I want to come back. I got several more questions about this specific DNA statement that Jesus sets our tone. But before I jump into those, just for clarity's sake, if people were to go to our website right now and they kind of on the About Us, and they would see the list of DNA, and people can go, and that'd be great for them to read. They'd also see a list of things under our doctrinal statement. And both of those are sort of biblically driven things. But what is, just for kind of clarity's sake, what is the difference between the list of things that are in our doctrinal statement and a list of things that are on our DNA?
Good question. So, yes, our doctrinal statement is the faith. Like it's what we've tried to design our doctrinal statement, and we're even clarifying that a little bit more to just make it a little sharper. But is like, this is what evangelical faith is. Like this is the tenets of what we believe. These are things that we would die for, kind of a thing, right? And they're what all Christians, we believe, are called to believe, that Jesus is God who came here, who died on the cross, and salvation is through faith alone. And all like those, that's what all we believe God would call all churches to believe. Our DNA is, or our values, but the way we call it DNA, is just the unique thing that we believe God is calling us to at Chase Oaks. Yeah. And so there's a lot of churches who share our doctrinal statement who don't share our DNA. And that's okay, right? There's different flavors of church and different kinds of church for a reason. And one of the things I always hate, and sometimes I'll mess up and I'll do it too. So it's, but I hate when I hear people in our church talk negatively about other churches. Yeah. And like these things, Chase Oaks, Yeah. And because, the church, Jesus describes as his bride, and And no bride is perfect, but he loves her. And so I don't want to ever talk negatively about his bride. I don't want people talking negatively about my bride either, right?
Yeah.
And so so this is just the unique thing. It doesn't necessarily make us better. It's just the unique thing that God is calling us to be.
Yeah.
And
That's great. Okay, I want to jump back into Jesus. That's our tone. And I want to kind of name maybe the elephant in the room a little bit, that within larger Christianity, or kind of Christian subculture in America, there's a lot of, or there are quite a few Christian leaders that are out, prominent Christian leaders, or they're podcasters, or, like that kind of stuff, that have, and actually have come out and said, or certainly demonstrated, or believe that the stakes are so high right now, culturally, with certain culture war things or whatever, that it is okay to set aside tone, in order to stand for, like that kind of thing. And I'd just love for you to kind of respond to that, as a pastor who's also a shepherd over people that are like listening to these folks and, watch, all of that kind of stuff. Because the message that we heard this weekend from you is different from the message that we hear a lot of times from prominent Christian leaders.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to that, but two things. One is our purpose, and the other is just what the Bible calls us to. So let me talk about what the Bible calls us to. It's never a good idea to disregard how the Bible calls us to engage culture.
Yeah.
And the Bible talks so much about it, and we don't even have to guess, because there's so many verses that talk about the kindness and humility and all. And if we ever suspend that because we feel like it's urgent, it becomes it dishonors Jesus. Like it's ungodly and it's wrong and it is evil, and it gives Satan every bit of ammunition he has for people to tear down church and to go the other way. And it almost guarantees too that the next generation is going to reject Christianity.
Right.
And I hate seeing that, because a lot of times people are so worked up about what's happening in culture, and they'll enter into the culture war kind of mentality, and their own kids, it almost guarantees their own kids are going to reject Christianity.
Right.
Because it is counterproductive. It's not the way we're called to. We're not called to enter into culture wars. We're called. This is a mission field, not a battlefield, and our weapon is love. And so when you violate that, it in the short run it can feel better because you're afraid, and but in the long run it's really counterproductive. And the other part is just our purpose. That our purpose is not to create a Christian nation.
Yeah.
Never has been. We're never told to do that. Like, you look at Jesus's conversation with Pilate, and Pilate's like, "Hey, are you trying to, do some kind of political thing?" And he's like, "No."
If I was, you would know it.
Yeah,
So,
he's like, I'm doing something else,
Right,
and it's his kingdom, which is God's will on this earth, and we're an expression of that kingdom, and we're citizens of heaven, ambassadors here, and we're called to. I mean, certainly we want to change people's lives and change culture, but it's not by trying to enforce our morality on a secular culture. That's actually that doesn't work. That's just bad theology. Even, I mean, none of us. Why would that's why Paul says, who are we to judge those outside the church? Let's work on it. So what we're designed is to influence culture by creating a subversive subculture of such radical love and truth and goodness that it wins over a world, and that morality without Jesus is just legalism. That's not, even if we were successful, we'd be successful at failing. And so, morality, what we want is to connect people to Jesus, who then points us to a different way of life. But you can't skip the Jesus part. That's not, that's not the way this works. And so when you enter into culture wars, even if you win, you lose, because you get your way, and you use your power to make sure you get your way, and all you're doing is pushing people who disagree away. And now that we are not the ones with the power anymore, now that we've been pushed to the margins of culture, we're like, hey, wait a minute, you're treating me kind of like I treated you. We don't like it. And we've kind of taught the world, in some ways how to be mean and how to be pushy and how to enforce our way through some kind of, legislation or whatever. And then we're shocked when it turns on us. And it's like, that's not the weapons of our warfare. That's not our fight. That's not, and so our fight is not against flesh and blood. It's not, it's the spiritual, it's a spiritual battle, and our core weapon is, love and truth and all. And so anyway, I need to quit preaching.
No, that's great.
But it's just it's a real violation of our mission, and it produces the pushback that we're seeing. And why would you think if we're pushy, we would get anything but pushback?
Right.
And
I think that when we fuel our own sense of panic or fear, and we can just sort of consume and fuel that, we can convince ourselves that the ends justify the means, whatever the means are, as long as we can, and it's pretty arrogant to just completely disregard that the Bible actually doesn't call us to ends; it calls us to means. We're disregarding everything that we're called to do to go after something we were never called to go after. And it's pretty arrogant of us to say, well, we know better than God. God called us to all of this soft stuff, and the soft stuff's not working. We've got to be hard, as if God doesn't know what he's doing. It's pretty... Okay, one last question. And this is just something that I'm personally just sort of wrestling with, that when we talk about the relationship between grace and truth, or between tone and truth, I think sometimes we just assume, well, we know what the truth is. We know what the truth of the gospel is. We have to figure out the tone part and how to, I have actually been wondering that I wonder if within the larger sort of Christian culture, if our struggle to get the tone right actually reveals a deficiency in our own understanding of truth. Like James would say, I'll tell you what you believe by how you live. And we assume that James is just talking about moral standards, or he's talking about religious things, like that kind of stuff, and not love, grace, humility, like those types of things. Like, what if James said, I'll tell you if you understand love by how you love? Or I'll understand, is it even possible to understand what love is, or to give a message of love in a non-loving way? Like, is it even possible to understand the truth?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So that, I'm thinking of 1 John, so John in 1 John is writing, it's some of the later books in the New Testament when these false teachers have come in and wreaked havoc and taken churches down a really bad path. And when you read 1 John, we don't even, it's really hard to tell what the actual misbeliefs are, because that's not what he even emphasizes. There are misbeliefs, but you just have to kind of guess at what they are. Is it Gnosticism? Is it whatever?
Yeah.
But what's really clear and what he emphasizes is lack of love.
Yeah.
And so he's talking about, and he says, this is how you'll know what's right and what's not. And you're like, okay, tell me, what's the list? And he doesn't give the list. It's, are they loving like Jesus called us to love? And they're not. You're like, well, okay, yeah, but what's the misteaching or whatever? Yeah. And so from his perspective, there is misteaching, but it's reflected in the way, in
certain character traits.
And just like Paul talks about, in the end, there's faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And so, I love the way a guy named Preston Sprinkle, I heard him say this one time. He said, if we get theology right and love wrong, we've gotten our theology wrong in the worst possible way.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, it is.
Bit.
I mean, and I feel like within the larger Christian circles, I mean, there's so many, whether it's in certain news things that we're watching or podcasts, where we are being discipled. And we don't think we're being discipled. We think we're just following stuff and whatever. But I think that it is worthwhile asking ourselves, am I becoming more loving? And am I becoming more gracious? Am I becoming more generous? Am I becoming, because if not, I might be being led into error, instead of into truth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what he says.
Right.
So absolutely. And it's something that we need to remember, because we get fixated on and the content's important and all that. Don't get me wrong, but But you're right. If it's not leading to, that's what John said. If it's not leading to love, then it's not Jesus.
It's not true.
It's not true, and
Right.
and it's
Yeah.
false doctrine.
Yeah.
And
So tone matters, and on multiples of fronts. Obviously, tone matters for our mission or whatever. But if we get the tone wrong, we're probably getting a lot more wrong than just our tone.
Good point. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot there. But this is going to be. I know as a design team, we've been working on the series for a while, and we've been working on the DNA. And clarifying that, and this is just a super, super important series.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you and your leadership and this last weekend's message. And I hope that you wherever you are, that you can join or go back and watch every one of these messages, because these are really, really important for us to all get it right, and be on the same page and be on mission together. So thanks for joining us here for Postscript, and we'll catch you next time.